Have you ever heard a song that felt less like a piece of music and more like a secret being whispered directly into your ear? A story so vivid, so steeped in atmosphere that you could almost feel the thick, humid air of the place it was born? In the summer of 1967, the entire world leaned in to listen to just such a secret. It was a story about a sleepy southern town, a family dinner, and a mysterious tragedy up on the Tallahatchie Bridge. The voice that delivered this secret was smoky, intimate, and utterly unique. It belonged to a woman who seemed to emerge from the Mississippi Delta itself, a fully formed enigma named Bobbie Gentry. She was more than just a singer. She was a storyteller, a poet of the backwoods, who painted pictures with her words that were as rich and complex as a William Faulkner novel. This isn't just the story of a one-hit wonder or a celebrity who grew tired of the spotlight. This is the story of a creative genius, a pioneer who controlled every aspect of her career in an era when women were rarely allowed in the control room. It's the story of a deeply private person who was thrust into the global spotlight and who ultimately chose to reclaim her own narrative by erasing it completely. To understand why Bobbie Gentry disappeared, we have to first understand the world she came from, the world she created in her music, and the profound, almost tragic disconnect between the two. This is the story of Bobbie Gentry and the enduring, heartbreaking mystery she left behind. To truly grasp the phenomenon of Bobbie Gentry, you have to transport yourself back in time to the heart of the American South in the mid-20th century. Imagine the Mississippi of the 1940s and 50s. This was a land of stark, almost brutal contrasts, a place of breathtaking natural beauty, lush green landscapes, languid rivers, and sky-stretching cotton fields existing alongside grinding, inescapable poverty. It was a world governed by strict social codes, deep-seated traditions, and the ever-present weight of its own complicated history. Bobbie Gentry was born Roberta Lee Streeter on July 27, 1942, in the heart of this world, in Chickasaw County, Mississippi. Her parents' marriage dissolved when she was just a baby, a common enough story that nonetheless set the course for her formative years. She was raised on her grandparents' farm, a life that was anything but idyllic. There was no electricity, no plumbing. Life moved at the pace of the seasons, dictated by the planting and the harvest. This was not the romantic mint julep south of Gone with the Wind. This was the hardscrabble reality. Bobbie's world was one of dusty roads, weathered hands, and the constant struggle to make ends meet. Yet, it was in this very soil of deprivation that her incredible imagination took root. She wasn't just observing her surroundings, she was absorbing them. The cadence of conversations on the porch, the gossip shared over the dinner table, the unspoken tensions that hung in the humid air, it all became part of her artistic DNA. Her grandmother was a formidable woman who recognized the spark in young Roberta. She saw a mind that was too sharp, too curious for the life the farm could offer. In a move that speaks volumes about her faith in the child, she traded one of the family's milk cows for a neighbor's piano. That piano became Bobbie's escape and her first tool of creation. She taught herself to play, and by the age of 7 she had composed her first song, My Dog Sergeant is a Good Dog. Even as a child, she was an outsider looking in. She was the girl who was shuttled between her divorced parents, spending time with her father in Greenwood, the larger town where the infamous Tallahatchie Bridge was a local landmark, and then later moving to California to live with her mother. This constant movement, this feeling of never quite belonging to any single place, would become a central theme in her life and her art. She understood the dynamics of a small town because she had lived them. but she also had the perspective of someone who had seen a world beyond it. When she was a teenager in Palm Springs, California, her mother encouraged her to perform. She learned guitar, bass, and vibraphone, honing her skills at local clubs. She took her stage name, Bobbie, from the 1952 film Bobbie Gentry, a movie about a beautiful, ambitious woman born into poverty in the rural South, who uses her wits and her wiles to challenge the rigid class structure of her town. The choice was almost uncannily prophetic. Like the character, Bobbie Gentry was a force of nature, underestimated by many, who was about to take on the world on her own terms. She enrolled at UCLA as a philosophy major, but her passion for music never waned. She transferred to the Los Angeles Conservatory of Music to study composition and orchestration. This is a crucial, often overlooked detail. Bobbie Gentry wasn't a folk singer who just happened to get lucky. She was a serious, trained musician who understood the intricate architecture of a song. She was studying theory, learning how to arrange for strings and horns, while simultaneously playing in jazz clubs at night. She was building her arsenal, preparing for a moment that she seemed to know was coming. The world was on the cusp of a cultural revolution. The polished pop of the early 60s was giving way to something more raw, more authentic. Bob Dylan had rewritten the rules of what a song could be about. The Beatles were pushing the boundaries of studio production. And out on the West Coast, Bobbie Gentry was quietly crafting a song that would distill the essence of her Southern past into a 3-act play just over 4 minutes long. She was about to introduce the world to Chickasaw County, and nothing would ever be the same again. The year 1967 was a cultural kaleidoscope. It was the year of the Summer of Love, of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, of psychedelic rock and flower power. The airwaves were saturated with the sounds of San Francisco and London. And then, out of nowhere, came this sound from the other side of the looking glass. A sparse, hypnotic guitar riff, a voice that was equal parts grit and honey, and a story that began with the most mundane of domestic scenes. It was the 3rd of June, another sleepy, dusty Delta day. Ode to Billie Joe was not like anything else on the radio. It wasn't a protest song. It wasn't a psychedelic trip. It wasn't a simple love ballad. It was a piece of Southern Gothic literature set to music. The song tells the story of a rural family reacting to the news delivered at the dinner table that a local boy named Billie Joe McAllister has jumped off the Tallahatchie Bridge. The genius of the song lies not in what it says, but in what it doesn't say. The family's conversation is painfully, realistically trivial. They talk about farming past the black-eyed peas and seem almost indifferent to the tragedy. The mother's most pointed comment is to chastise her daughter, the narrator, for her lack of appetite. But beneath this surface of banal chit-chat, there's a universe of unspoken emotion. What were they throwing? A ring? A baby? An emblem of a secret love that society would never accept? Gentry, with a stroke of artistic brilliance, never tells us. She understood that the power of the story was in the question, not the answer. The real tragedy wasn't just Billie Joe's death. It was the chilling emotional disconnect within the family, the inability to communicate, the secrets that fester in the silence between people who are supposed to love each other. The something they threw off the bridge is almost a red herring. The real weight of the song is the emotional void it exposes. When Capitol Records first heard the demo, they were intrigued but saw it as a B-side. It was a 7-minute-long raw acoustic recording. They wanted to put the more conventional bluesy number Mississippi Delta on the A-side. But a savvy producer named Kelly Gordon recognized the song's hypnotic power. He trimmed it down, added a subtle, haunting string arrangement that swirls around the vocal like the muddy waters of the river itself, and fought to make it the lead single. The result was a global phenomenon. Ode to Billie Joe knocked the Beatles' All You Need Is Love from the #1 spot on the Billboard charts. It sold millions of copies, earned Gentry 3 Grammy Awards, and became a cultural touchstone. Everyone had a theory about what was thrown from the bridge. The song was analyzed in university literature classes and debated in coffee shops. Bobbie Gentry, the unknown girl from Chickasaw County, was suddenly one of the most famous women in the world. But here is where the story of Bobbie Gentry veers away from the typical tale of sudden stardom. She was not a puppet for the record label. She was the architect of her own career. This is one of the most crucial and underappreciated aspects of her legacy. She was a shrewd, intelligent, and fiercely independent artist in an industry that was, and largely still is, dominated by men. Her debut album, also titled Ode to Billie Joe, was a concept album before the term was widely used. Every song was a vignette, a character study rooted in her Mississippi upbringing. It was a cohesive artistic statement, not just a collection of potential hits. And Gentry was in control. She argued with executives about cover art, she had a say in the production, and most importantly, she wrote the material. Her follow-up album, The Delta Suite, released just 6 months later, was even more ambitious. It was a sprawling, atmospheric masterpiece, a musical tapestry that blended country, blues, soul, and even psychedelic rock. It was less commercially successful than its predecessor, perhaps because it was too complex, too raw for the pop charts, but for critics and fellow musicians, it solidified her status as a true visionary. Side 2 of the album is a seamless suite of songs, flowing one into the next, creating a dreamlike journey through the sounds and moods of the South. It was a bold, artistic move that was years ahead of its time. She continued to innovate. She recorded an album of duets with Glenn Campbell, which became a massive commercial success and spawned several hit singles. The chemistry between them was electric, a playful, witty rapport that charmed audiences. But behind the scenes, Gentry was the driving force. She wasn't just the girl singer on the arm of the established male star. She was his equal, a creative partner who brought her own distinct artistry to the project. This is a part of her story that often gets lost in the mystery of her disappearance. Bobbie Gentry was a trailblazer. She was one of the very first female country artists to write and produce her own material. Long before artists like Dolly Parton or Taylor Swift took full creative control, Gentry was fighting those battles in the boardrooms of Capitol Records. She was a businesswoman. She invested her money wisely, started her own publishing company, and understood the mechanics of the music industry better than most. She saw the bigger picture. She knew that pop stardom was fleeting, and she was determined to build something more lasting. This led her to what might seem like a surprising next step in her career, Las Vegas. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, Las Vegas was the entertainment capital of the world, but it was also seen by many as the place where serious artists went to die, a creative graveyard of glitzy reviews and watered-down hits. When Bobbie Gentry signed a multi-million-dollar contract to headline her own show, some in the music press saw it as a sellout. They couldn't have been more wrong. For Bobbie, Vegas wasn't an ending. It was an opportunity. It was the ultimate stage, a place where she could finally realize the full scope of her creative vision without the interference of record executives. And what she created there was nothing short of spectacular. Her Vegas show was a full-scale theatrical production, and she was the undisputed creative director. She designed the sets, which often recreated the swampy, atmospheric vibe of her albums. She choreographed the dancers. She wrote the musical arrangements, blending her country folk roots with the slick showmanship of a Broadway musical. She even designed her own costumes. She was involved in every single detail, From the lighting cues to the script for her stage banter, the show was a massive success. She became one of the highest paid entertainers on the Strip, commanding a staggering salary. She was a superstar in a city of superstars. She would perform her hits like Ode to Billie Joe and Fancy, but she would also play deep cuts from her albums, perform blues standards, and even engage in witty, sophisticated comedy bits. She was in complete control of her art and her image. The song Fancy from her 1969 album of the same name became her signature stage number. It's a powerful cinematic story song about a young woman born into poverty, whose mother, desperate to give her a better life, dresses her up and sends her out to be a woman. The lyrics are bold and unapologetic. Here's your one chance, Fancy. Don't let me down. It's a song about survival, about using what you have to escape your circumstances. It can be read as a tragic story of exploitation or as an empowering anthem of a woman taking control of her own destiny. Given what we know about Bobbie's own ambition and drive, it's impossible not to see a parallel. The song's final triumphant line, "I ain't done bad," felt like a personal statement. But even at the height of this incredible success, there were signs of a deep and growing disillusionment. Gentry was a fundamentally private and introspective person, living the most public of lives. She gave interviews, but she was famously guarded. Journalists would try to get her to solve the Billie Joe mystery, and she would skillfully deflect, saying the real theme was the indifference and lack of communication that led to the tragedy. They would ask about her personal life, and she would steer the conversation back to her music or her business ventures. She was playing a role, the glamorous, confident showgirl, but the woman behind the persona remained elusive. There's a poignant quote from an interview around this time where she said, "I have a very strong sense of privacy. I don't have any secrets, but I don't have any desire to have my private life exposed." For a woman who had built a career on telling intimate stories, she was fiercely protective of her own. There were brief, high-profile marriages. First to a casino magnate, Bill Hara, which lasted only a few months, then to a singer and comedian named Jim Stafford, with whom she had her only child, a son named Tyler. This marriage, too, was short-lived. Each time, she retreated further from the public eye. The cracks were beginning to show. She started to speak more openly about her frustration with the industry. In a 1974 interview, which in hindsight feels like a warning, she said, "I do it all. I produce, I write, I supervise the building of the sets. I'm a stickler for detail. The uhs and ahs and ands are all where they are for a reason. But I get tired of it all. The music business is a hard, hard world." She had achieved everything an artist could dream of. She had #1 hits, Grammy Awards, critical acclaim, and financial independence. She had proven to the world and to herself that the girl from the dirt farm in Chickasaw County could conquer the world. But the conquest seemed to have come at a great personal cost. She had created this larger-than-life persona, Bobbie Gentry, and now it seemed Roberta Streeter wanted her life back. By the late 1970s, her television appearances became less frequent. Her last major public performance seems to have been on The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson in 1978. Her last public appearance of any kind was at the Academy of Country Music Awards in April of 1982. She was 39 years old, and after that, nothing. The silence that followed was absolute. It wasn't a gradual fade. It was a clean break. Bobbie Gentry didn't release a statement. She didn't announce a retirement. She simply stopped answering the phone. She vanished from the public record so completely that it was as if she had evaporated. For years, the world barely noticed. In the pre-internet age, it was easier for a celebrity to slip away. But as the years turned into decades, the question began to grow louder. What happened to Bobbie Gentry? The mystery of her disappearance began to eclipse the mystery of what was thrown from the Tallahatchie Bridge. Theories, of course, ran wild. Was she living in a remote cabin, scarred by a bad experience? Had she fallen victim to some secret tragedy? Was she disfigured and hiding from the world? The speculation was often lurid and disrespectful, a stark contrast to the dignity with which Gentry had always carried herself. The truth, as it has slowly been pieced together by dedicated journalists and biographers, most notably Tara Murtha, in her exceptional book Ode to Billie Joe, is both far simpler and far more profound. Bobbie Gentry didn't disappear because of a single dramatic event. She disappeared because she chose to. It was the ultimate and final act of taking control. She had grown weary of the machine. An artist who prized authenticity above all else found herself in the most artificial of worlds. She had told an interviewer once, "I'm not a troupe. I'm not a roadshow. I'm a person." The business of being Bobbie Gentry had consumed the person, Roberta Streeter. There are a few key factors that seem to have contributed to her decision. Firstly, she had a son. After her divorce from Jim Stafford, she was a single mother, and it's widely believed she wanted to give her son, Tyler, a normal childhood, away from the glare of the spotlight that had defined her own life. She had the financial means to do so, having invested her earnings shrewdly, and she chose her child's well-being over her own fame. Secondly, there was the creative burnout. She had been working relentlessly for over a decade, not just as a performer, but as a writer, producer, and director of her own career. In a 1978 interview, one of her last, she expressed a desire to move behind the scenes, perhaps to focus on writing or producing for other artists. She had said everything she wanted to say as a performer. The well, it seemed, had run dry, or at least she no longer wished to draw from it in public. But perhaps the most compelling reason lies in her fundamental nature. She was an observer, a storyteller who drew her inspiration from the real, unvarnished world. Fame had placed her in a bubble, separating her from the very sources of her creativity. How can you write about the sleepy, dusty Delta when your life is penthouses and private jets? She had become a character in someone else's story, the story of a celebrity, and she wanted to go back to being the author of her own. There have been fleeting, almost mythical sightings. In 2016, a reporter from the Washington Post, after months of searching, managed to get a message to her through an intermediary. The response that came back was polite but firm. She has no interest in talking to reporters. Reba McEntire, who had a massive hit with her 1990 cover of Fancy, tried for years to contact Gentry, to thank her and perhaps collaborate. She never succeeded. The door was and remains firmly closed. This refusal to engage, this decades-long silence, is what makes her story so uniquely compelling and, in a way, so tragic. We live in an age of relentless self-promotion, where celebrities share every detail of their lives on social media, where fame is a currency that is hoarded and never willingly surrendered. Gentry's rejection of this is a radical act. She walked away from millions of dollars, from adoration, from a legacy that was still unfolding. The historical significance of Bobbie Gentry is twofold. First, there is her undeniable impact as an artist. She expanded the boundaries of country and pop music, proving that a song could be a piece of complex literary fiction. Her narrative style influenced countless songwriters, from Rosanne Cash to Taylor Swift. Her work as a self-sufficient female producer and writer paved the way for generations of women in the music industry to take control of their own careers. She was a feminist icon before the term was commonly applied to pop stars, a woman who built her own empire through sheer talent and determination. But her second, and perhaps more enduring significance, lies in her absence. Her disappearance is a powerful statement about the human cost of fame and the sacredness of a private life. In an era of oversharing, her silence is profound. It's a reminder that we are not entitled to every part of an artist. They give us their work, their art, and that is a generous enough gift. Their soul, their private self, is their own. Bobbie Gentry gave the world Ode to Billie Joe, Fancy, and a treasure trove of other brilliant songs. She gave us a glimpse into a world that was uniquely hers. And then she took back what was hers to keep, herself. She left the glittering persona of Bobbie Gentry frozen in time, forever young, glamorous, and mysterious, while Roberta Streeter was finally allowed to go home. She was a poet of the particular who found the universal in the locale. She wrote about what she knew, the dust, the heat, the unspoken sorrows, and the fierce, quiet pride of the Mississippi Delta. And in the end, she returned to the very thing she chronicled so beautifully, a quiet, ordinary, private life. The greatest mystery Bobbie Gentry ever created was not about what was thrown from a bridge. It was about how a person could build a legend and then have the courage to simply walk away from it, leaving behind nothing but the echo of her extraordinary voice and a silence that speaks volumes. And that wraps up today's video. If this video resonated with you, please give it a like, leave a comment with your feedback, and subscribe to stay updated on upcoming videos. Appreciate you watching.